you all for being here tonight. Dr. Marla Morris is Professor of Curriculum Studies in the Department of Curriculum Foundations and Reading within the College of Education here at Georgia Southern University. Dr. Morris has been teaching at Georgia Southern for 17 years. She earned her Ph.D. in education at Louisiana State University in 1999 and is the author of numerous books and articles on curriculum studies and education. Her books include the Curriculum Studies Guidebooks, Concepts and Theoretical Frameworks on Not Being Able to Play, Scholars, Musicians, and Crisis of Psyche, Teaching Through the Ill Body, Jewish Intellectuals and the University, and Curriculum and the Holocaust, Competing Sites of Memory and Representation. Currently, she is working on a book on human-animal relations in education. Dr. Morris studied classical piano at Carnegie Mellon University in the 1980s. In 1981, she studied with renowned pianist and teacher Alvey Zerko at the Aspen Music Festival School. She also studied with many pianists along the way, but Zerko's dynamic teaching style and meticulous deconstruction of musical scores has remained a lasting influence on her musical explorations and scholarly pursuits. Dr. Morris's musical career was derailed due to an injury to her right hand, the crisis that inspired her book on not being able to play. But in 2010, she decided to restart her performance career. She has given performances at the Telfair Museum in Savannah, at the Goodman Recital Hall at the Kaufman Center in New York City, and at the Merkin Concert Hall in New York City. After her lecture tonight on educating the inner ear, she will perform a piece she composed that was influenced by Rachmaninoff and Liszt. The piece she will perform is called Sound Colors, which is an exploration of musical ideas, tone, slowness, key changes, and impressions. This piece is in one movement and is modeled after Liszt's Piano Concerto No. 2, which is also in one movement. But unlike Liszt, Morris's work is not about virtuosity, but about changing tone colors, registers, and sounds. Ladies and gentlemen, the Department of Curriculum, Foundations, and Reading proudly presents Dr. Marla Morris.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, Dr. Rittschof, for your generous introduction. I want to also thank the Department of Curriculum, Foundations, and Reading and the College of Education for supporting this event tonight. I would also like to thank the Georgia Southern University Performing Arts Center for opening up this beautiful space for me to present this lecture and performance. I would like to do two things this evening. First, I will lecture on what I mean by educating the inner ear by reading a bit from my recent book titled Curriculum Studies Guidebooks, Concepts and Theoretical Frameworks. These guidebooks are divided into two volumes rather. Tonight I will be reading a little from volume 2 on my chapter on aesthetics. Second, I want to perform a piece I composed for the piano called Sound Colors. As Dr. Rittschof remarked, this piece is in one movement and is an exploration of ideas, tones, registers, changes, and colors. I begin with a section I title The Difficulty with Art. Psychoanalysis, as Freud told us, is an impossible profession. Likewise, Donald Blumenfeld-Jones tells us that there is a certain, quote, impossibility of art and an impossibility of speaking about it. First, art is an impossible profession. Creating is impossible. That is, it is very difficult to create something out of nothing. In scholarship, which I consider a creative endeavor, we draw on the work of others, like dance, music, painting, or acting. But to make that work our own becomes the impossible. How to make things your own is possible only if you let go of ego and simultaneously become mindful of what you are doing. This is what Mark Epstein suggests. Composing a piece of music is not exactly new. Composers draw on music that has been handed down to them in the past and try to make something new from something old. The same problem arises in dance, scholarship, or painting. We do not create out of a vacuum. The second point about Blumenfeld-Jones's claim that art is impossible to speak raises a different issue. There are art forms that have nothing to do with words, like music, unless we are talking about singing. Instrumental music has little to do with words. How to speak an art form that has little to do with language. Music is formed through phrasing and breath, like speaking, but this is a different kind of speaking, almost a preverbal speaking. How to speak the preverbal, that is impossible. But for some, preverbal feelings get expressed in music. But one must be able to listen, to really listen to perform music. In the listening is the speaking. The two are not separated. Listening speaks. The audience, too, must listen, and all kinds of strange things happen when people listen to music. Sometimes music puts them to sleep. Other times it makes them pensive. Sometimes it makes them drift in a state of reverie. Interestingly enough, Maxine Greene, who has done much to bring our attention to the importance of aesthetics in education, feels that if a listener falls into a state of reverie, she is simply not paying attention. Greene says, quote, "A Bach cantata cannot be realized as a work of art if the listener slips into reverie after the first fingering of the strings," unquote. Greene rather calls for, quote, "attentiveness and active participation," unquote. Conversely, I feel that people can appreciate a Bach cantata if it allows listeners to drift. Music can reach people on all kinds of psychological registers, including drifting and reverie. I understand Greene's concern for attentiveness to the music, but this attentiveness does not have to be wholly intellectual. It can also be emotional. In fact, attentiveness involves both intellect and emotion. Of all the arts, music brings up emotion more so than painting, at least for me. Perhaps the emotions that are brought up are painful. Painful emotions cannot always be intellectualized, but to feel pain in the music is another way to experience art. Greene writes about the arts and bringing about of what she calls an, quote, intensified consciousness, unquote. The performer, and here too I'm thinking of the musician, must take her work with the utmost seriousness and intensity. Otherwise, the experience for the listener will not be intense. This intensity of the performer has to be somehow translated and projected out into the audience, not an easy task. Translating and projecting a piece of music is a form of speaking without words. That is, if we are talking about strictly instrumental music. This intensity can be felt and projected to others. When this happens, it is a remarkable occurrence. The intensity is not something that is willed onto the audience, but is transferred onto the audience by feeling more than anything else. If music makes one emotional, it just does, and there it is. The ego cannot control it, because if it is truly intense, it overpowers the ego. Gary Raspberry says, quote, that working words, unquote, helps us to enact dreams. Music, too, helps us to dream, and dreaming is not the same as intellectualizing. The trace. Walter Benjamin, long before Derrida arrived on the scene, wrote about works of art having a, quote, trace and aura. The trace is the emotional resonance that is left over after the concert. There is a trace of the experience that gets encrypted in the memory of the listener. This trace might affect someone for a few days or perhaps for several weeks. When people keep thinking about what they heard, the trace of that music is permeating psyche. Also, the notion of aura, as Benjamin puts it, is another idea left out of most discussions on music. There is an aura at hand when musicians perform. The space, the instrument, the sounds, the resonances, the response of the audience all contribute to the aura of the performance. Perhaps when Maxine Greene talks about active engagement with a work of art, the intellectualizing of it comes later. After listening to a concert, it might take days to unpack what happened. So being actively engaged, as Greene suggests, can be a delayed and deferred engagement because we do not always understand what we experience. Isn't there always a lag time between what we hear and what we understand? Donald Blumenfeld Jones suggests that dance involves both feeling and intellectual engagement, quote, below the threshold, unquote. But what is below the threshold? Emotionality happens below the threshold, and when intensity is translated and projected out onto the audience, then something mysterious happens that cannot be spoken. Blumenfeld Jones suggests that feeling just is and, quote, cannot be described, unquote. If the concert has little impact on us, then it wasn't a good concert. But if the concert was a good one, we are left speechless. Being left speechless is a kind of speaking. Perhaps we can't speak our feelings, but we can feel them. For Blumenfeld Jones, dancing does not involve speaking, but certainly a good dancer speaks the dance through gesture and movement. Yet, like music, there is a certain ineffability about dance that cannot be spoken. This is what Blumenfeld Jones might mean when he talks about the impossibility of speaking about the arts. Interiority in the arts. Ineffability also has something to do with the difficulty of expressing interiority. Elliot Eisner suggests, quote, the arts are a means of exploring our own interior landscape. When the arts generally move us, we discover what it is that we are capable of experiencing, unquote. This interior landscape about which Eisner speaks is hard to get at because much of it is unconscious. What moves us might be something that we do not understand. Why we are moved is a mystery. Some art forms move us more than others. Being moved is always a sensuous experience. S. Brent Plake comments, quote, the sensual roots of aesthetics are largely forgotten today, unquote. But the sensuous is not lost on Eric Law, who Amitabha Kamur comments on when she says that, quote, Lott's mix of memoir and music criticism is a form of sensuous noisemaking, unquote. This sensuous quality of dance is certainly not lost on Celeste Snowberg, who says that, quote, body dance is a form of sensuous knowledge. Art and empathy. Tom Barone suggests that the arts can help us to develop a more empathic understanding. When someone is truly moved by a performance, as Eisner points out, empathic understanding, as Barone suggests, might become possible. There is a connection that is made sometimes, perhaps an empathic one, between, say, the musician and the audience. Thought in the arts. The notion of understanding has something to do with thought. Let us think on this for a moment when it comes to the arts. To write a composition or choreograph a dance takes thought. Transitions, harmonies, tonal relations, phrases, movement, and sound all require a great deal of thought. The same can be said for the painter or the novelist. John Dewey points out that there is, quote, the odd notion that an artist does not think, unquote. Creating art or performing works of art are emotional experiences, but they also require thought. Performing music means that one must think about what one is doing. Thought and emotion go together when performing or composing a piece of music, acting in a play, dancing, or painting. Elliot Eisner, like Dewey, says that historically, the arts have not been understood as a form of knowledge. One of the reasons that the first cuts to school curriculum are the arts is probably because people still think of art courses as merely ornamental, to use Eisner's words. American culture is particularly problematic because the arts are not highly valued. What we have seen in recent years is the collapsing of symphony orchestras all over the country. One wonders about the future of classical music. Is there a future in it? Conservatories across the country still draw students and turn out performers, but it is hard to make a living being a classical musician, and many symphony musicians have had to take deep cuts in salaries within the last few years. Artists in general are not supported in American culture as they are in Europe because they are not valued the way businessmen are. In American culture, it seems that an individual's worth is measured by how much money he makes. Musicians do not make much money, unless they are opera stars at the Met. Some musicians who play in major symphony orchestras can make good money, but most make average salaries. The issue, as Eisner suggests, is that the arts are considered fluff. Attending a concert is a luxury in hard times. Who can afford that? Well, people still go to concerts in hard times. Music and the other arts are not merely fluff. They are the heart and soul of culture. If we cut the heart and soul out of the curriculum, our children's education is impoverished. Imagine a life without music. Imagine life without art. Aesthetics and the obscure. Here, I want to think about more obscure aspects of the aesthetic experience. Theodore Adorno captures the obscurity of aesthetics when he suggests that, quote, art's substance could be its transitoriness, unquote. This is especially true with music. Music happens in time, and what takes months to compose is over in 30 minutes. Music is a transitory art because it happens in time. Performing happens in time, and the music, as it is listened to, is a momentary experience. The music floats by, and the audience listens in time to notes written in time. Sounds happen in time and then disappear, leaving only, as Benjamin would put it, quote, a trace and an aura. The disappearance of the sound during a musical performance is a strange phenomenon indeed. The performer has control over the dynamics of the sound produced. A good performer nuances the sounds made and makes the audience listen. The intensity of the performer will draw in the listeners, but the intensity of the sound, as Adorno puts it, always ends in a cessation. Music allows for suspended moments in time. It seems that time is drawn out by sound. Sound happens in time, and time changes as the music changes. Philip Jackson, in his book titled John Dewey and the Lessons of Art, declares that when attending to a work of art, quote, both the experiencer and the objects of experience have changed, unquote. This is not an easy idea to understand. There is an uncanny connection between the performer and the audience. If all goes right, perceptions change. The audience is changed by listening. The musician is changed by performing. Then there is the space between the musician and the audience where the sound is produced. What happens in that space between the sound, the musician who produces the sound, and the audience's perception of it is a mystery and, as Adorno suggests, raises only more questions. The interpretation of the music by the audience is another strange event. One person interprets the music to mean one thing, while another interprets the music differently. It is as if the music brings up images, and people try to put those images into story form or some kind of form that they can grasp, even though the music is ungraspable. Jacques Derrida suggests, quote, in order to think art in general, one thus accredits a series of oppositions, meaning, form, inside, outside, content, container, signified, signifier, represented, representer, etc., which precisely structure the traditional interpretation of works of art, unquote. Music in time seems to be formless, but there is a form because when written down, notes are followed in succession through time and form as they are written, even if there's a feeling of free-flowingness about the music. Music is performed in some kind of form unless it is totally improvised, but still there is a form to the improvisation. We really do not know where music comes from. It just does. Certain people have a gift for music while others do not. Certain people have a gift for painting while others do not. We do not know where the gift comes from. But when we talk about someone like the painter Andrew Wyeth, we say he had a gift. When we see clips of Horowitz playing, we say he had a gift. Still, people need to study their craft to fine-tune them, if you will. This is the purpose of conservatories. Having a gift is not enough. One learns how to paint or how to be a musician through study. But what is this gift? We do not know. Adorno says, quote, "It is self-evident that nothing concerning art is self-evident anymore, nor its inner life, nor its relation to the world, not even its right to exist," unquote. Maxine Greene thinks otherwise. She suggests that we can develop, quote, "the ability to feel from the inside what the arts are like and how they mean," unquote. Adorno suggests, contrarily, that people do not understand, quote, "the inner life of art." Here I am thinking of comments Christopher Rothko, Mark Rothko's son, makes about his father's paintings. Christopher Rothko comments, quote, "He, Mark Rothko, cannot tell you what his paintings or anyone else's are about. You have to experience them," unquote. So if the artist cannot tell you what his paintings mean, how can we know, as Adorno puts it, the inner life of art? Even if the artist understood what he was doing when painting, still, that does not mean that the art can easily be translated by the viewer. Interpretations of a particular painting differ no matter what the artist meant. Paintings and instrumental music have this in common. They are nonverbal. How to verbalize what is nonverbal? Impossible. Christopher Rothko says that his father's paintings were pre-verbal. What is pre-verbal gets expressed through gesture, emotion. But we cannot quite put our finger on what is being expressed. So when one looks at a Rothko painting, one might be dumbfounded. So, I really don't know what art means at the end of the day. I cannot tell you where my piano compositions come from or what they mean. The meaning that is made is up to you. As Jacques Derrida might say, it is the other who signs. It is the audience who interprets the music. You decide what this music means to you. One thing is clear, though. This piano is a Steinway, the best of the best. And I feel very fortunate to be able to play on such a gorgeous instrument. Thank you.